Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to the channel guys, and today got a very special episode for you. We've got another driver interview on the channel. Last time obviously we interviewed a young British driver, Ayrton Simmons, and today we have Bart Horsten onto the channel. So Bart, welcome onto the channel. Thank you for coming.
Thanks Mike, it's really good to be here.
No problem at all. So with these kind of driver chats, we kind of take a look back Bart's kind of career to date, as we say, because it is weird to kind of think. Obviously, he's a young guy himself, but technically in motorsport, competing in Formula 4 and looking into British F3 this year, it's kind of a career already in itself. But we're going to go back at the start, and well, your first competitive was with the Tiger Kart Club, isn't it, in Western Australia? But you actually first got introduced to a kind of like a taster at Buckmore Park in UK in around about 2010, I think it was.
Yeah, I think the first time I drove go-kart properly at speed was here in the UK, funnily enough. In fact, a lot of the times, motorsport related stuff's been, I've had a lot of big moments in the UK despite living in Australia for quite a while. Yeah, it was more of just kind of a school day where they had, I think, just rookies and people who hadn't really driven go-karts much before. I was only 8 years old at the time, so pretty young still, but I remember really enjoying being in the kart and kind of that sense of freedom that you didn't really have so much at that age, doing a lot of things. So yeah, and I just loved driving. And so as soon as we got back to Australia, I got onto my parents and said, you know, could we go karting? So, and then the local kart club, fortunately, is 2 tracks, and they were both only about half an hour away from where we lived. So yeah, then I started karting, and it kind of just grew from there.
Well, I think that's obviously where kind of a lot of people's enthusiasm for something grows. They kind of get a taster, and yeah, you sound a bug. I know obviously we were chatting a little bit before, and you've always kind of been a fan of motorsport, but yeah, as a kid, obviously, like you said, at 8 years old, you were first introduced that. It is probably enough to kind of give you the bug and go, yeah, this is pretty cool to kind of go fast or anything. It's a little bit different to riding a bike around your kind of local area, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I wasn't actually a huge fan of like thrill rides and speed and stuff when I was younger. I am now, but for some reason the go-kart, it was always really different to me. I just enjoyed, I think it was the control of being able to do what you want and, you know, move around in the cart and all the feelings and sensations you get. It's really fun. And, you know, when I had to go in a go-kart last year, like a proper one, I was shocked how fast they were. I forgot how fast they feel because they're so low to the ground. There's no suspension. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, forget how, even though the F3 and the F4 are much faster, it feels so fast in those go-karts. I think sometimes people don't realize.
Yeah, it just, well, it's because you're so exposed, I think, as well in those kind of go-karts, and like you said, you're so low to the ground, it just feels that little extra bit quicker. Even like you said, driving kind of F4 and F3 cars yourself, clearly they are faster, stuff on that. So I just want to know a little bit more actually about what's it like kind of growing up competitively karting in Australia. What's the kind of pathway like over there? Obviously you started your local club, but then how did you progress on through the motorsport ladder, so to say?
To be completely honest, there isn't, I think in a lot of motorsport, there's never really been a set pathway. I mean, there kind of is now with the F4, F3, F2, F1, but I think, and the same thing goes in go-karts, like there's championships and there's classes and things, but there's no one telling you what to do. There's kind of people who say you should do this, do that, and they've all got opinions, but yeah, it's a bit of a mess in some ways, but we never did it professionally, or at least I never pursued it professionally in Australia, partly because I'm from Western Australia, and all the big events and the national championships are all on the other side of the country because that's where most of the people live. Most of the tracks are, and most people race. So and that's a good it's a good 4-hour flight, so it's quite a long way just to compete in those events, and very expensive if you live on the other side of the country flying over, which I did for Formula Ford, and I know how hard it is. So really, it was just local stuff. I mean, I still took it seriously, but it's not like here you turn up and you see like these huge teams, like 8 karts, and they've got all these people plugging in with data and stuff like that. It was, everyone just running their own karts usually, maybe smaller teams or just groups of friends working together. But, even though it was only local competition, the racing was still really hard and really competitive. And there were some, kids who I thought were really good drivers. And, some of them I've seen do quite well within Australian motorsport. But yeah, I only did one event at a national level, which was only just before I stepped into cars. Other than that, it was all just local stuff. And I think mainly, like I said, I took it seriously, but it was more for my own enjoyment rather than pursuing a career.
That's interesting in terms of, well, obviously it makes sense. Yeah, obviously Australia is quite a massive expanse of a country compared to UK, so it's not like you can just drive 4 hours up the motorway or something and you're the other end of the country. It is internal flights for you, and obviously I think we're all kind of in domestic sport, try and take it as seriously as we can. So what made you go from, obviously you were competing seriously within karting and, like I said, did that national tournament as well in it, but what made you think, okay, I'm now going to make the step to cars? And it was when you made that step to Formula Ford in Australia the kind of movement you were like, I might want to try and pursue this as a career?
Yeah, I think, it was always a dream and always an ambition to be a professional race car driver and an F1 driver. But I think maybe that kind of, as you got older, it felt less realistic to a point, But there was kind of a year where I karted. It was still only local karting, but my results in general had been pretty good. But then there was a year where I ran 2 classes and my driving just went leaps and bounds, and I won a lot of local competitions in this across the state and did really well and really enjoyed it. And then when I did that one event at national level, I didn't finish the final, but despite limited practice, I was already, really close to the pace. So then I was kind of thinking, I don't think there's much more for me here in terms of, I don't really want to go to the national karting competition, which is a pretty similar cost to probably doing Formula Ford locally in Western Australia. So I think it wasn't planned. Nothing was planned. We went down to the local track, Barbagallo Raceway. It's the only real racetrack in the whole state, and WA is humongous, just huge. But went down to Barbagallo, and I was just supporting a friend who had started racing little Hyundais, and we had gone on to this guy who ran Formula Fords locally and just said hello to him, and he said, do you want to have a go in a Formula Ford? And I said, yeah. And that was my first time driving a car, like of kind of any sorts. So I learned to drive a manual with a Formula Ford, a racing manual, just going around. It was I tell you what, I missed a lot of gears and made a lot of mistakes at first, but it was really fun. And as soon as I got in the car, my mind kind of opened up, because go-karts was good and fun. I loved it, and I was good at it. But I got into the Formula Ford and I just thought, this is so much more, like more speed, and there's so much more to do, and it's so much harder to drive. And again, that kind of feeling when I was younger, of all these different possibilities of what it's like driving a go-kart kind of came back again when I jumped into a car, and I was kind of like, how great is this? And after that, I couldn't really stop myself. And then I did some races locally, and then I did the national championship with the same guy the next year.
Yeah, and that's probably quite a good point to move on to your Formula Ford stuff. Obviously, you didn't compete in a full season, right in thinking that, but you competed the majority, and you were able to kind of pick up podiums, and I think you got a couple of fastest laps during the year as well. So considering that you went from karting on a regional basis to competing in national Formula Ford competition, it was probably quite a massive step up from what you were used to competing in.
Yeah, It was. It definitely was, especially the national Formula Fords compared to the state ones. They run the Duratec engines, so they're 140 horsepower, same amount as an F4 basically, but it's torqueier because it's naturally aspirated. And they've got no drag, and they're only 500 kilograms, so they're quicker in a straight line than an F4, but nowhere near as much grip. So I think when I got on the F4, it did not feel fast, at least in a straight line compared to the Formula 4, because those things are scary, especially at Phillip Island, where in the Torrey you could do like 240 Ks, and the wind was basically steering you across the straight because you were so light, and the platform of the tyres is so small. It's just these small semi-slick tyres, and when it's wet, it's even worse. But no, it was still really fun, and like I said, it was like a brand new experience, and just this kind of new adventure to go on. It was not the year didn't go great because I was the only driver with the team, and the car hadn't really been developed. We were mainly racing against people who bought McGales and stuff, and we were running a custom built car that it didn't have the time or the money to be developed. So we did struggle, and so sometimes we would get the car right. Sometimes we'd really struggle at certain tracks, and then sometimes it would work. And there was one weekend where the car was really quick, and we were at the front that whole weekend. That's where I got fastest lap. Just missed out on the win. Got 2 seconds and a third. So yeah, but I thought the championship was great. The racing in Formula Ford was just unreal. It was like nothing else because the slipstream was so strong. And again, I got to race with a lot of really good drivers who have gone on from that now. And yeah, I just feel really fortunate that I got that opportunity.
It sounds an incredible opportunity, and those cars sound absolutely mental to drive in terms of that, geez, just being so light there. Faster than, well, I'm right in thinking the Formula Fords, they don't have front and rear wings.
No, they got no wings at all.
So,
They're like the Formula Fords here, but it's just more. We've got more power.
correct. So more power vamped up. That just must have been absolutely incredible for this first experience. You just gone, yeah, crazy. Well, I suppose obviously learning to overtake and follow in that kind of series, again, with everything, was just a steep learning curve, and you probably learnt a lot against the drivers that you did race and come up against.
Yeah, again, in Australia, I think the average age of drivers is just a bit higher in general compared to Europe and here. So when I go into F4 and I was kind of like an older driver, I went to Australia, I was 17, but I was still, 16, but I was still really young. Like most of the guys were 18, 19, 20. And a lot of them had done like 2 or 3 years. So the championship's really, really strong there. It's kind of like the headline single-seater championship. So, and there were so many cars on the grid and so many great tracks. So, like I said, it was just really cool. And to be honest, it's almost a shame I didn't get to race in that championship again in some ways, but I'm happy that I moved on.
Yeah, and I think that's probably good. How did it actually come along? Because obviously you did that kind of you raced the majority of that season, and like you said, you didn't go on to race in it another year. So you moved over to the UK, I believe, and competed in British F4. Last year. How did that opportunity come around? And that's quite a big move to kind of move from Australia, where you're based, to come and live in the UK and pursue this racing dream.
Yeah, well, we'd actually flown over about midway through the year because I came over to the UK to do some driver training and meet with some teams, because some of the people I'd met in Asia and Perth as well had contacts just from when they used to, because most of them used to work in the UK in the 80s and 90s in the motorsport industry, so they had connections with people at Carlin, R Fortec, so on. So I just went in, because I didn't know what it was like. Like I said, it's not really like that in Australia. You don't have those big professional teams so much, especially like in single seaters. It's very small teams or people running their own cars like a go-kart. So it was a very different experience walking to these huge buildings and these just ranks of single-seater teams inside them. Very professional outfits. So just getting to know how it all works here, how it operates, and then organize for a test day with a few F4 teams, and just had to go see what it was like. I enjoyed driving the car, and I did pretty well. So I got recommended to me, you should probably do the championship. So then from that point on, about midway through that year, we were looking at British F4 and kind of thinking, will we do it? Will we move over to the UK? So the planning started around, midway through the year. And then we flew over at the end of the season to choose what team. I did more testing. We still didn't know until November. And then I eventually decided to sign with Arden for next year. And yeah, by then we decided obviously that we're going to move over, but it was still a really busy time after that next 2 months. It's really hard for me and my family getting everything ready. I think it's not as easy as some people think. Even moving from, you think Australia to the UK, being part of the Commonwealth, it wouldn't be that hard, but it's really different. It's really hard to get things like sorting out bank account and insurance and renting a place and things like that. So yeah, I'm just really happy that we managed to get everything done and ready for that season.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main things I want to just focus on here for a moment is that is incredible. You've literally travelled halfway across the world, and like I say, even though we kind of speak the same language, kind of English, it's part of the Commonwealth, you'd think the transition might be easier. I guess society-wise, it is kind of making friends and anything on that base, but like you said, bank accounts, finding somewhere to live, everything on there, it's a pretty kind of big commitment for you and your family to make, but it sounds like, was the racing the main motivation behind this move, or that was the main?
100%.
Well, it's awesome, man. It's amazing that obviously your family have supported you in terms of that to kind of make that move, and it's obviously for a lot of people who come from New Zealand and Australia, it feels like you guys have to move over here to go on the European circuit to kind of further along that kind of racing prospects of a career for yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't think no one's putting a gun to your head, but
Yeah.
I mean, look at the guys who are doing really, really well. I mean, most of them have been, like Dillon and Piastri were karting in Europe already before they even got into cars. And I think if you want to take it seriously and you want to show to the prospective race teams or junior academies that you're serious about your racing, then you've got to move here. And I think I knew that I had a much better chance of a professional career in the UK than I did in Australia, regardless of what form that takes, GTs, touring cars, driver coaching, whatever.
No, absolutely. I think there is just this hub and kind of well-organised stuff in the European circuit that there's certainly, if this is the career and path you want to go to, which obviously it's the one you do want to go to, there's just so many more opportunities available for you. But obviously, yeah, you spoke about signing there for Arden. What was the kind of thing that kind of swayed you in the decision to sign for Arden?
I felt like there was a good culture in the team. And just quite helpful from building me up as a driver perspective. I thought I was helped along quite well in that aspect in terms of coming in. Even though I'd done some racing, I felt underprepared, especially versus, like I said, European drivers. I feel like there's a bigger, again, just the culture and the preparation that's put into people who get into an F4 car for the first time at 14 or 15 years of age here. They've done a lot of testing and sim work and usually high-level go-karting, so it was quite a shock to me. Not so much the level of competition, but the effort that goes in car racing. And I think, it was Arden were very helpful with the transition as well in terms of moving to the UK and being very supportive of that. And I felt like they helped build me up as a driver and make me stronger.
Well, that sounds like anything you'd want from a team, really. That you kind of, you're this guy that they don't know, but that they make you kind of feel valued, and I think that's what everyone wants to kind of feel like in whatever sport they play for, or kind of driving. In this case with motorsport, is that you felt a valued part of that team, and they actually did care about your progress, which sounds very good. But we'll talk about obviously that British F4 season. It was your rookie season within the sport, and well, it went pretty well going into the kind of the second weekend at Donington. You got a podium and your first race win in those first weekends. What was it like to kind of feel like you obviously back yourself as a driver and as someone competing, but it must have been a great feeling to get on the podium and win your first race so soon into the season?
Yeah, in some ways I think it did a little bit of, it didn't do me any harm, but I think it made the rest of the season look a bit average. But I think the next few rounds could have actually been a lot better. A few little things going other ways, but I think at the time it was massive because, to give you the context, we seemed to be doing quite well in testing, and I did top the media day, although it was a bit of a strange last session in terms of the track was drying. So we thought we were looking quite good, and then into Brands Hatch at the first weekend, pace wasn't really there. I mean, it was still, the field's close, especially around Brands Hatch Indy, so I think I was about 2 to 3 tenths off the pace, but that's P7 at Brands Hatch Indy, so that's nowhere on a track you can't overtake. Lucky it was a wet weekend, so we managed to get some opportunities there. And then I made a bit of a mistake when I was in second place. I lost the lead, and then I made a mistake when I was in second place and spun off the track in the second race at Brands. So, not the way I wanted to start the weekend or start the series in general. Not a great weekend. And so into Donington, it wasn't looking too great. And then especially that for that weekend, for some reason, I think it was a noise restriction based thing because they couldn't have so many days in a row. They did the same thing at Thruxton. They couldn't only have certain days in a row of racing. So practice was on a Thursday and then Friday was a day off. So we did the free practice on Thursday and I was nowhere, wet and dry. I was about P10, P11, quite far off, which again which is looking pretty bad because I was a lot quicker when we tested at Donington earlier in the season. And then going into even Friday qualifying, I made a few mistakes. I think it was quite a tricky session. It was like a greasy track. It was Saturday morning qualifying after having a day off on Friday. It was quite a greasy track and we had a red flag midway through. So it was kind of only like a 2 or 3 lap run at the end, but still I qualified about, I think 8th. It was 8th for race 1 and 10th for race 3. So not very well. And I had a really good race. I recovered really well in the first race to get that first podium, and then I drove another really good race in race 2 to get that win. So for me it was massive because of the recovery from where we were earlier in the weekend, and I was kind of at my lowest point at that point on Thursday afternoon, and to kind of reach that high again on Sunday was massive, I think, for me at the time, because you got all that work and everything you did to move over here, and then it kind of came crashing down, and then all of a sudden it just shows you how quickly things can change in about 24 hours, right? Go from 0 to hero.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially in motorsport, it's one of, I think it's one of those most pressurised things because obviously there's a whole team behind you and everything behind the scenes at Arden, but you're the spearhead, you're the focus. Everyone looks at the drivers, everyone's looking at the results that the drivers can get on track, and like you said, you can have a terrible weekend, but then obviously at that opening, well, not a terrible weekend, it was still your kind of rookie, but you were frustrated by yourself, and yeah, like you said, go 0 to hero. You've got that win under your belt at Donington, and now you're starting to go, okay, yeah, it's such a confidence thing, I think, sport in general, and I imagine especially as a driver, those sort of performances really kind of boost you and how you feel going into the rest of the races.
I think they definitely make you tougher. I think they build up your resilience in general. That kind of belief that no matter what's thrown at you or where you are starting, you can still make something of this, which again it's actually quite hard because most of the time overtaking is bloody difficult and in single seaters around these tracks. So if you qualify badly, you're not going to have a great weekend, chances are, but even then you got to do what you can, do your best to make up for mistakes you made and just do better next time. And at the end of the day, it is like you said there's a whole team behind you, and I'm very grateful to have those people working hard for me and putting the effort in and reaping the benefits when it does go well. But as the driver, you you've got a lot of responsibility, and it is a sport where you live under pressure. You know, everything is to an extent in a pressured scenario. Qualifying's pressure, races pressure. You know, the most important things are like starts, safety car restarts, last laps, and those are all, you know, just small moments where you need to perform at your best. So it's a difficult sport, but it's an enjoyable one.
I have no doubt about that, mate, because you've moved halfway across the world just so you can do it. So yeah, I'm taking that there's some level of enjoyment in there rather than just I hate doing this, but I'm going to move across the world to do this. But I probably the next high you got on the podium again, I think in Thruxton, but Crofton, Alston, you kind of came into I don't know, was it? Well, I'll let you explain. Was it like a good setup with the car, or just in terms of that confidence, you came into kind of a good spell and run of podiums, didn't you?
Well, I think it was more the Thruxton was a slump. It was my weakest track when we tested. We had some car problems there, especially a little bit of an engine problem as well, which is going to show up at Thruxton because you'd only brake twice and it's flat. So it was a tricky weekend, and again, I didn't seem to. I don't like to say stuff like this generally. Like this, I like this track. I don't like this track, but it definitely didn't seem to favour my driving style. Like it was quite difficult for me to learn how I was meant to drive the car around that track. I got it the second time we went there. I got it in the end, but all the other tracks came to me a bit more naturally, I feel. And Thruxton, I was kind of still confused. And I think sometimes, again, that can be kind of off-putting. There's only two braking zones. You know, there's only it's kind of just that first complex and the chicane. Like what could be so hard? But it's the same for everyone. You've just got to drive it as well as you can. And I think I struggled there, and we had some problems with the car. So the best I could do was a reverse grid podium, and then a few average results in the other races. But when we came into Croft, I think I just drove. I think that was probably some of my best driving was the Croft and the Alton qualifying, especially because we were well down in free practice, but and it is quite scary Alton, especially in the qualifying session, that pressure like we talked about, and you can't free practice, and we were nowhere. We were like a second off in free practice, but we kind of knew we should be there in qualifying for one reason or another. So you just kind of have to put faith, you know, the car's going to be good enough, drive your best. And then I got P3 in quali at Alton, which was really good. And I think it was P4 and it was two P4s at Croft, and it was only 2/10 off pole. But again, I really enjoyed both those tracks. It's actually a bit of a shame I don't get to go to Croft. I mean, that would be pretty scary in an F3 car. But Croft is a really fun track. And even though they resurfaced it, they got rid of kind of the smaller bumps. The bigger bumps are now more pronounced, and the track was so fast after they resurfaced it. It was like 4 seconds faster than it was before. The grip was insane. So yeah, it was a really fun track to drive, and I think that helped in both those tracks. They're just really good tracks.
Yeah, I think if you enjoy driving somewhere, obviously, talking about your difference, just in the way hearing you speak about, Thruxton and Croft, one's like, I remember talking to Ayrton about it, and he's saying that like Thruxton's just basically just a load of slipstream overtaking, isn't it? And
it's a bit, it's hard to do like qualifying practice, and also because it's so abrasive, your tyres only last 2 or 3 laps. You can only do a hot lap for 2 or 3 laps. You've got no chance after that at all.
And yeah, so that's literally the margin for error, is that window of performance is so small, which, amplifies the pressure on you compared to kind of other tracks. But, overall you kind of managed to, I think we'll talk about one more race of that season, just because I was actually at that Silverstone race, and I want to get you kind of experience of driving in it, because at the Silverstone race, the weather that day was very changeable, wasn't it? It was kind of going mixed between dry and wet, and
yeah, it was tricky.
Yeah, it seemed a really kind of a tough one to kind of cope with. I want to know what it was like to be driving in those conditions.
Well, I remember in practice we had like a dry session, and then all of a sudden this storm came in and you couldn't see. There was like one lap and it was a little bit damp on the straight, And the next lap, you could not see anything because it was so wet and it was so windy, and the track was just covered in puddles, and it was a new surface as well. So people were unsure still if it would have the flooding problem that the old one had. So it was pretty crazy weather conditions, and qualifying was dry, race one was dry, but unfortunately I had an engine failure on the out lap. So when I pulled up to the grid and I put my foot down to rev it, the engine had gone to limp mode, so I had no revs at the start and almost stalled. I got overtaken by everyone, just went around really slowly. So that was a bit sad, but fortunately the next race was wet, which really opened up possibilities for me, and we managed to come through the field quite well in that one. That was really fun. And then obviously the last race was strange because I think we were all on wet tyres, but it dried out a lot, and it was a safety car as well, which made it even longer race. And by the end, we were having to be really, really careful on the wet tyres to look after them, because I remember us really looking for the puddles and the bits of water where it was under the safety car, just because the wets they were tearing up on that lap 2 or 3. I think if someone had gone slicks, they would have done pretty well. But I think everyone just copied each other, played it safe. They're going wet, so I'll go on wet. So, it was an interesting race.
Yeah, I think nobody wanted to kind of go risky on that day, because the weather, it just seemed to kind of quite changing throughout the day, wasn't it? It was just like 1 minute it was like pouring it down with rain. Like you said, race 2 was wet and you kind of basically couldn't see anything. And then the next one, like you said, the last race, it was drying through it, but still everyone was on the wet tyres. But I mean, it was fantastic to watch as a spectator. But I was imagining driving and...
It's very odd driving wet tyres in the dry like that. And because you're driving around, you kind of think, I want to push to the maximum. But you also know that the more you push these wets, they just get hotter and hotter, and the pressures go up and up, and the grip just completely dies off. But there's kind of almost a tipping point where the wets go to the point where you just slide around on them anyway. So you just start putting your foot down, and it was just wheel spinning out of left field and stuff like that.
That must have been a lot of fun to try and control. But it's all a learning experience, isn't it, in terms of that? And those are the type of races and stuff that they're brilliant to race in, because it improves your car control and it improves your skills as a driver. Because if you drive in easy conditions all the time, well, it'd be fun and make your life easy, but it certainly, when you do get these challenging conditions, it certainly would be a lot more difficult to handle. But yeah, no, certainly was a crazy race. But overall in that season, so your rookie F4 season, you finished 5th. Were you happy with that result?
No, obviously not. I think in hindsight, I'm a bit happier about it. But at the time, why didn't I win? Boo-hoo kind of stuff. But I definitely think we had a really bad run through the Knockhill weekends, which could have been a very dominant one. We lost a lot of points there, like a lot of points. So I think 3rd could have been a possibility, definitely. 1st, I'd like to think is possible. But I think, definitely 4th or 3rd in the championship was, I think, very acceptable, and could have come quite easily with 1 or 2 things had gone better. Because in Knockhill qualifying, I got pole, but we got done for a technical infringement during qualifying, so we started at the back of the grid despite getting pole position, and Knockhill's not an easy track to overtake on. So that kind of ruined that weekend. And again, like I said, there was a lot of points lost there. But it was still a lot of fun, Knockhill. I love that track. And like you said, the tricky conditions you get around here, I think that's part of what makes the British racing so good. I didn't do a single wet race in Australia. I had like wet practices and some damp sessions. But in the actual Australian Formula Ford Championship, we did 21 races, 0 were wet. Last year I had like 10 wet races, and they were all different. And it's a big skill to have as a driver, is adaptability to all these different conditions and things like that. And I think when you race in this country, you get that, you get that variability and you get those changes, and you have to be able to adapt to it, because if something happens mid-race, you can't make a car change to adapt to that. you have to change your driving for the track and the car or the tire. So yeah, again, I think it just makes it more enjoyable and kind of adds to the sport more.
Yeah, and I was going to think, I assumed that obviously the weather would be a lot better in Australia, but you obviously confirmed it. But yeah, nice of you to confirm from there. But I'll be kind to you, mate, because obviously, you know, I expect you as a driver, as a competitor. You're doing this seriously to compete. Being fifth, it isn't going to please you. I think fifth in your rookie season, considering you've come across, is not a bad achievement in terms of that. But it's good that you're kind of driving yourself forwards. But obviously, you came across other drivers in the championship. Who would you say actually was the best driver? Obviously, Zane Maloney's gone on to Euro Formula Open now, I think. But yeah, who would you say were the best guys in that championship alongside you?
I think the great thing about last year was it was relatively open. And I think the points, like I said, a few things went certain ways, and I think the points made the standings of the drivers look a lot more spread out than it was. If you were there on like the practice days, and a lot of time under pressure, I think the same guys would come out on top. But yeah, but when we were practicing and stuff, the times in the field were just so close. The top about 9, 10 guys. But the guys who really, I mean, Alvarez was consistent. Maloney was very good at using the new tyres and that and qualifying. But I thought Louis was quite. I really enjoyed racing Louis Foster, and I find him quite. Yeah, he was fun to race against, and I thought he was a good. Him and Browning, I thought were impressive. They impressed me as drivers, especially in the wet. They could be quite. Louis was a bit hot and cold, but sometimes he'd be just dominant, like that Silverstone weekend, just obliterate everyone in practice and quali in the races. Really, I got a bit close. I got a bit close to him in the last race, but other than that, he was really, really fast there. And he had a few like wet races. Like I know the Brands race that I got second in. When it was pouring down, he came through from the back of the field, set fastest lap. It was really quick. So yeah, he was quite good. But again, he had a few rounds where he was really poor again. So it was quite changeable there. And then Browning was quite similar. Like sometimes he would drive a really, really good race. And he's really tough to race against. You know, you're probably going to make contact going side by side. But he sometimes he'd pull through and have these amazing drives. So I think probably those two.
Nice, good ones to kind of. It's always nice kind of hearing. You know, you're a guy who's actually raced against them, and it's always interesting how they compare to as a spectator watching, but how it's actually like to race those guys on track. It's fascinating, but I imagine was the level of competition a steep increase from what it was in Formula Ford in Australia?
I think the best description is, like I said, it was very close. And I know I singled out those two guys because I thought sometimes they were just really, really impressive on occasion. But Maloney and Alvarez were better over the whole season, probably. But I said like most of the drivers on the grid, it was not separating them. They were all really good, and that was probably the biggest thing compared to Formula Ford, where I felt like Formula Ford, you had someone who might be quick one weekend, but generally there was only 2 or 3 guys who were always there. Whereas I feel like in F4 it was a lot closer, and I think that a lot of that gets owed to the teams as well, because I thought the teams pushed the drivers really hard and have a lot of resources behind them. And like I said, they're very professional outfits. So I think the teams do a really good job of preparing their drivers. So that's part of why it's so close in F4, in British F4 specifically.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good one. It's that depth of the competition. Obviously, you know, it's one of the main formulas on the ladder going up. It's one of the main regional competitions. Obviously, ADAC F4 and French F4 are quite top levels in there, but British F4 is still one of the most respected, and I think it's a great learning curve, especially a lot of British guys have gone through it from there, and obviously a lot of other guys travel across the world like yourself to come and compete in it as that kind of first step. But obviously you were competing in British F4. How soon did the opportunity to race? Obviously, we've had the whole Corona break, and you've had to wait a very long time for it. But hopefully, it gets started in August. But how you're moving up to British F3 this year? How did that opportunity come about for you?
Again, not planned. No idea what we well. I wanted to do British F3. That was kind of we did British F4 because we thought it would lead well into British F3, and I thought British F3 was just a really good championship. So, looking at British F3, we didn't know. We knew again some of the teams because I'd raced against them in F4, so Fortec, Khan, and Double R. So we had some choices there, and we knew them, but Lanan. The only reason that happened at all was because a friend of Graham's, Graham Johnson, who runs Lanan, he came up to me at the Knockhill weekend, and he came up to a few of the F4 drivers and said, "Would you be interested in a free test with Lanan in British F3?" I said, "Of course, I would drive anything for free, anything at all." So came down to that test day at the end of last year with George Russell. It was a really cool day. Enjoyed it a lot, and getting to drive that F3 car for the first time was amazing. It was one of those Donington days though, where you had just about everything out there. So it was like a 70s F1 car and stuff like that you had to fly past. But yeah, it was so much fun. I remember that day fondly. But that's, like I said, that's the only real reason. It wasn't planned. I didn't know Graham. I'd heard of Lanan from other people. I'd heard good things, but I didn't have any contact there really. It was just because of that one event, and then going to the test day, and then I really enjoyed it, and it went really well. And then after that, you start having a conversation about testing and do you want to race next year, and then it kind of just went on from there.
Nice. It seems, well, it is sometimes the way in racing that you just kind of stumble across these opportunities. Obviously, you have the talent and you prove yourself in these opportunities that you get given in a test. You then prove you're worthy enough to, get the opportunity to go further than just a test and actually race for them British F3. But yeah, it is also motorsports, this kind of network of kind of creating links and getting opportunities on that front to kind of open doors for yourself. But what would you say? So obviously you've driven an F3 and you've driven the kind of, we were talking before this, you're doing testing at the moment. What was the step up? Obviously you said the Formula Ford car was quicker in Australia, but what was the step up from Formula Ford to F4 to now British F3?
Yeah, well, the F4 was quite different from the Formula Ford in terms of just slick tyres, so much more grip, and not having, and learning not to slide the car around, having to wait to want the tyres instead of just smashing them straight away because they were semi-slicks on the Formula Ford. So I think tyre preparation was a big thing. I'm still learning that now with the Pirellis on the F3, which is so important when you have a slick compound. And getting used to a sequential instead of a manual. I mean, it's not that hard, but there still is little niggles to get used to with each gearbox to see how they behave and how they react and things like that, especially in the wet. So that was, the F4 was still a tricky car to drive. I'd say it's quite a tricky car to drive, and it had sometimes a bit of an unusual driving style. But coming into the F3 kind of, I don't know, for me, obviously it's a lot faster, but I kind of felt like I could adapt some of what I had in the Ford and some of what I had in the Formula 4 as well. It reminded me of both cars in some ways, and then also very different on its own. Especially with the new aero package in the high speed, the way the car handles now is quite different. It's a lot more stable. Before it had it didn't have much rear wing. So the rear wing is bigger now, as well as we've got more angle on the front wing. So it's more aero in general. But it felt a bit kind of skittish and oversteering in the high speed corners at the end of last year. But with the new aero package, it's so much more solid, and you can feel every time you weave the wheel, it really pulls. And every time you change up, say you stuck up a gear shift, you bounce off the limiter and the ECU cuts your power, or you short shift or something, you can really feel the drag pulling you back. And then the braking zones, it just stops dead. It brakes later than the F4, even though you're going in quite a bit quicker usually. So getting used to just the amount of grip that the car has, because it's quicker everywhere. than the F4. Especially, like I said, with the new aero package, it's a really quick car, really fun car to drive. Uh, I've really enjoyed driving it.
And I think that probably leads you kind of good stead, hopefully, for the season ahead. Obviously, you've got a revised calendar that's starting in August. I think it would probably be a stupid question to ask what your aspirations for the season, because from talking to you here, your aspirations are going to be you're going in to try and win it, or going in to at least be in the kind of top half of British F3 and impress for, I assume, the next stage on the ladder of progressing to hopefully maybe one day F1.
Yeah, I think you've got it right there. But obviously, I'll be in it to win it. Like, I hope for their sakes, everyone else I'm racing against is. It's serious competition, and F3s are a pretty prestigious championship. So I imagine, and I know a lot of the drivers there I've raced last year, as well as some others I just know, and it's going to be really competitive. It should be really fun this year. And again, I think it's going to be quite an in-depth grid, a bigger grid than British F4 probably was last year. Especially, I think later in the season, we're going to have a few more drivers come in for the last few races, I would imagine, if the calendar stays the way it is. And obviously now you've got High Tech and JHR's even doing a few rounds. The championship's getting really competitive now, which is really good to see. So the only really goal I set for myself was just beat last year's performances. So more wins, more poles, more fastest laps, more podiums, better position in the championship. But yeah, I will be obviously trying to do my best.
It sounds like the best way to approach things, mate. You got to have these kind of small goals of yourself. That those are the things that kind of drive you on to the next step. I suppose your first competitor is yourself, isn't it? And now quite a lot of, if not all, the tracks are on the British F4 calendar, on the British F3 calendar. You pretty much, you're not new to these places now. You've got an understanding. Yes, it's a new car, and you've got to find your braking points. Like you said, it's you can brake a lot later. You've got all that extra grip in the car, but you're going to want to probably improve on your personal performances there. And just as a driver, which is all these junior formula categories are, it's every year you've got to keep this kind of rapid level of development, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I look at myself 2 months ago and I go, what was that idiot doing? Like, I barely drove. Even on the simulator, I'm kind of like, how are you that bad then? Because it feels like you just move so quickly. And again, that's a shocking thing, that rate everyone develops at is so fast, and it's a sport that, it'll leave you behind if you're not pushing. But again, that kind of makes it so fun and enjoyable, is because all these other guys are out there trying to do the same thing. There's so many people aim for the same goal, but it all comes down to those important moments, those pressure scenarios on the racetrack. So yeah, it will be really good. Like you said, I know the tracks now, which was something that you can struggle a bit against in terms of you come up against Janetta drivers in F4, and they know the tracks quite well, especially when it's damp or wet. That track knowledge, you notice it a lot when you race against them. So this year, I've definitely noticed already in testing, you just have that. It's more than confidence; it's experience. You just know what's going to happen sometimes without having to worry or think about it, and you can trust in yourself that way. And it's made things a lot easier in those changeable conditions, learning what the track's going to do or what the weather's going to do. So I think it will definitely benefit this year. The only difference is Alton, Silverstone, and Donington. Obviously, we do a longer layout, but generally, other than Silverstone, the layouts don't add too many corners. Silverstone GP is obviously quite different from Silverstone National, but I've been lucky enough to already do 3 or 4 test days at Silverstone GP, and it's amazing to drive in these cars. So I'm looking forward to the racing. Should be really good there.
Awesome. It must be so exciting to kind of have this cusp of the season ahead of you. Fingers crossed, everything goes to plan, and the season starts without any hitches come August. But I think that's probably, it's been fascinating kind of looking in your journey to where you are obviously in to date, and obviously we've had a quick look ahead into hopefully what the British F3 season will be, a successful one for yourself. But we'll end with some kind of like personal motorsport questions in just of. So who's your racing idol?
It changed a bit. When I was younger, it was Daniel Ricciardo. I still like him a lot. Obviously, it's not like I suddenly disliked him, but I think especially as a kid, a bit of a fanboy, because coming from the same town in the same country and seeing what he did and getting to meet him, and he signed my go-kart, and I got the first. When the Ricardo karts came out, I got one. I love those karts, but yeah. So I think from that perspective, it was kind of inspirational, just because of the relatability. Coming from a similar place, I think a very different person, and drives differently to me and is quite different on the racetrack. But I massively respect him. I thought even in Austria, I think people could see the effort he was putting in that car, and I think in qualifying, especially in the last few years, I think he's one of the best qualifiers on the grid, possibly the best sometimes. So yeah, just a really good driver to look up to. But I think if I look at the driver who I think's the one who I'd try to emulate would be, I think Alain Prost is a very complete driver. I think he's an amazing person in terms of how he approached racing and how successful he was with different teams and different cars, and the confidence to maybe not always win in qualifying, let Senna get some pole positions, but then come through in the race and win with fastest lap. And I think sometimes he's undervalued in that because Senna's so spectacular, but at the end of the day, they were always so close to each other and they always pushed each other further. So I think Senna and Prost are both amazing, but I think sometimes Prost got more out of himself just in the approach that he had with the car and his driving. And I think he's a really good example of what a racing driver can be and kind of set the pathway. I think both Senna and him did before Schumacher came in, the pathway for the modern racing driver and how they approach the sport.
I think Prost is a fantastic idol to have, and like you said there, he's a little bit undervalued at times. He's always mentioned in that Senna and Prost rivalry, but Prost on himself was just this incredible, and like you said, that's probably the best way to describe Prost. He's a very complete driver, and learning from Lauda himself, he kind of had this refined model, didn't he, of just being a relentless winner, not necessarily driving on the edge, but doing what he needed to do to win Grand Prix. So I think that's a pretty good idol to have. And Daniel Ricciardo, I was expecting that one to be mentioned in some aspect, but the Prost was a surprise. So that was interesting. So have another one. What's your favourite track that you've driven to date?
I asked myself this a bit. I think it's Knockhill. I think it's still Knockhill. Knockhill was so much fun. It's amazing. And the best thing is if you stuff up a corner, it's only 50 seconds before you come back around and you get another go. So, I love Knockhill so much. Have you seen the pictures of the F4 cars there? They go on two wheels and stuff like that. It's because the curbs aren't real. They're painted tarmac, so you can run all over them. And then we even use the sausage curbs at the chicane to lift the car up, to set it up. So it's it's crazy scary. And the cars, they bring extra roll bars, and you break your suspension and damage the floor, obviously, and other parts of the car just wear away. So you've got to have all these spare parts when you come to Knockhill because the car just gets beaten up on the landings. But the amount of speed you carry over turn one and that chicane, and I think the whole track, the surface is really grippy. The curbs are really fun to drive on. The track dries really fast. It's grippy in the wet. I just found it so much fun. And every corner is an event there. Every single corner is really different and interesting. And I've never really had a track like that. I will say, though, that as much as I love Knockhill, Alton's really, really good. Brands GP and Alton. That is really, really challenging. And that you don't get that same fear, really, anyway. I mean, Phillip Island, I would say, is the other track I'd put there because they're all quite scary on the edge. Phillip Island a bit different because it's more about high speed, and, going on the grass, and it's just you're just constantly at a higher speed pretty much all lap, other than the two slow hairpins. And the racing there is amazing. But the Alton and Brands, you can't make mistakes. So that extra pressure you get. And again, it's just they're nice flowing tracks and a really challenging section of corners. Yeah, again, it's kind of like every corner is an event at Alton at Brands, and I don't think you get that on some of the newer tracks or some of the the more modern tracks.
I think it's certainly the driver skill needed on there. I know, obviously, if you compare a lot of the older tracks in Formula One, have kind of been put to the wayside because they're not good for racing because the cars have become so big and wide. But like you said, in terms of driver skill and probably enjoyable for your aspect, they add that extra level of kind of interest and challenge to kind of prove yourself on. Definitely.
Yeah, well, I think isn't that the Mugello Imola argument at the moment? People are saying that Mugello and Imola could be quite dangerous, or quite hard to overtake on, but it would be. I think they'd both be really hard tracks on the drivers, similar to Hungary. So hopefully they get to race there.
And I think those are a good mix of tracks to have. We want the kind of overtaking, but the quality of overtaking, if you overtake at Mugello or Imola or Hungary, it's a lot more earned, isn't it? Rather than just a DRS overtaking that aspect, or you guys slipstreaming at Thruxton.
You can watch NASCAR, IndyCar, but a lot of those overtakes don't mean anything because they're just drafting each other and they're going to give the position back on the next straight. So I don't think overtaking is everything.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that one. And so third and final question before we round off this interview, Bart, is we'll stick on the track basis of who's, we'll combine it in the two. What's your kind of favourite track and who's your favourite driver? I guess who it would be on this one, on the current 2020 grid.
Okay, current driver on the grid, on F1 grid, you mean, right?
Yep.
And my favourite track in the world that I probably haven't driven.
Yeah, anywhere in the world, any racetrack.
So basically where I want to drive. I mean, there's a lot of cool places because you got like Sebring and Macau. Again, that looks super scary but super fun. I think Monaco is cool, really cool. The qualifying there and that back sector, even the first sector, up the hill, because through Casino, the speed and how close they get to the barriers. So I think Monaco is an amazing track to drive. I'm going to have to say, but again, this is not me. This is just me asking more experienced drivers than me what I think the best track is. And almost everyone always answers the Nürburgring. And obviously, I've lucky enough these days I can drive it on a sim. But unfortunately, I can tell you from driving real tracks, it doesn't usually do it justice. But I would, even on a sim, the Nürburgring has that kind of element of fear that I don't think you get, or that kind of that tension, just because it's such a long lap and there's so many corners and it takes a long time to remember them. And I think the challenge of the Nürburgring, especially the 24-hour race, you got nighttime and slower cars, and I can't imagine how it is to manage wet weather around there, because where puddles and stuff are drying up and raining different parts of the track. It isn't like different parts of the track at Silverstone or Spa, not over a few kilometers. This is huge amount of space. So yeah, I just think it's because it's kind of the ultimate challenge. So I think it's the ultimate track.
That's an awesome
and my favorite driver on the grid. Yeah, I think we'll go Danny Rick. I like George Russell as well.
I was going to say they were probably the two that probably came to mind. Danny Rick for obviously the reasons you've had, but obviously George Russell you've met as well. So I suppose he's a real guy to aspire to see going through the pathway of trying to emulate, definitely for a young driver.
Yeah, and I think we can all see that he's pretty good as well. And I think everyone sees that he approaches his racing very seriously and puts a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, he to me, for George, seems to have a very wise head on young shoulders. He's very level-headed for someone so young as driving. Like you said, his skill is undeniable, even in a Williams that is struggling. But he was unlucky yesterday in the race. Well, we're doing this after first Austria, but it will come out, I think, post-Hungary in terms of that. But Bart, it's been great chatting to you. It's always interesting talking about people and their journey. Well, obviously you're still on your journey and how you kind of want to aspire and progress in your racing career. But it's interesting learning about how you've been to date, your kind of change across life, moving halfway across the world to come and race in Britain in terms of that. It's been fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun looking back at stuff. A lot less painful than maybe I would perhaps have imagined. But no, it was a lot of fun, and I always love talking about motorsport. I think I can't help but be happy and just feel really grateful for being able to be involved in the way I am.
It's clear your passion and love for it, mate, shines through. It's just how you talk about it. It's that passion and love, and I wish you the best of luck in this British F3 season. Obviously, as your career continues to develop and progress, hopefully the sky's the limit on it. But as you know, in the racing world, it's how it performs on track, and hopefully those results can come. I know you'll, obviously from talking to you in this, you'll set very high standards for yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you. I will do my best. I'm sure this year will be fun. No matter what happens, it's going to be awesome.
Nice, and that's it from us today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the interview with Bart. Obviously, I'll leave a link to his Twitter as well, and you can keep up to date with Bart's career by following him in the British F3. So make sure you give him a watch after you've kind of learned a little bit more about him. It's always nice to kind of get to know a driver here. But that's it from us today. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. So for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.